What are you guys doing here? Hello, Avril. Avril, right? Hello.
How you doing? Professor, if I may,
Sure.
it's been several weeks and I've already learned some, I don't know, just some really nice insights. Life is so hectic, but one of the things you said, just treat each other like humans, and that's missing in so many of our interactions. Um, it's really a nice thing to remind people to do because we don't, we're all like so closed off with our phones and but that basic decency to each other is something that kind of disappeared. Thanks for the reminder.
For many, many, many centuries, for most of us, backyards, they were not even around. So whatever exactly you wanted to do, you would do it in front of your house, and then all the neighbors would kind of come in, and now you had a community. As the houses got bigger and the front yards became smaller or gated and the backyards became bigger, things became more privatized. And then you have the rewiring of the human brain and how they want to live their lives. And in as much as I think reminders are really, really, really good, like, son, don't drink, or don't smoke, or don't watch porn, or don't hang out with these friends, and don't do ABCDs. They're really good, insightful, wise pieces of reminders, but the truth is they don't really have much of a shelf life. It sounds good, and I know that the American culture is a bumper sticker of sorts. I had a student in my class yesterday, it's like one of those Oprah Winfrey moments where he says, I want to be celebrated as a human being. And it's something you see on a bumper sticker, or like exercise an act of compassion as you're driving down the road. They say, wow, that's a really, really nice statement. But, given the force of this culture, these tiny twigs don't really stand the pressure. They eventually break and they disappear. They don't really mean much unless you want to create for yourself a life where these reminders become an actual part of life, which is really, 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 really tough. You live in Oakland? Your child is only 2, maybe 3. At a certain point, and you love people, you love Oakland, you love integration, diversity, inclusion, all that stuff. And as you spend more time with your child, the attachment grows, and with attachment comes a good amount of concerns and worries. And at a certain point you realize you're a little busy, your wife is a little busy, both of you are emotionally a little fragile because of age and just the way life is. And you say, maybe I should, put my kid in the daycare. Or maybe, your life will allow you to spend a good amount of time with this kid until he or she gets to be 5 or 6 or 7, it's time for school. And because as parents, without really knowing, attachments all of a sudden grow. No one really educates us about any of this stuff. And then you begin to have some worries, for the first time your eyes open and you look at Oakland and you say, man, I loved Oakland, but that was loving Oakland before having a kid. But now I have a child. I love Oakland. I don't know if I like it. It's good to smoke in it, it's good to drink in it, it's good to party in it, but raising a family in Oakland, I'm not really quite sure. But then you begin to look for schools. you know, today was the first time in about maybe, I don't know, a decade, 10 years, that I have to walk, every morning because of my heart condition. And so I said, oh, I forgot my tissues, from the office. Let me go to the cafeteria and grab myself some napkins. And I walk into the cafeteria, people look bad. The place is in a complete disarray. And you say, Jesus Christ, man, what is this place? And I've taught at a lot of different schools, the way people look and the way people smell and just the way the cafeteria is. And you say, this might have been a really nice place to work at when you're young. You walk, and it's the privilege of every young person. You start your life with a good amount of hopes and dreams. And you say, oh, no, I'm not going to turn out to be like that or like this. My hopes and dreams, after all, I am Amir. Time passes and you realize that despite your hopes and dreams and despite, all the intensity you inject in your hopes and dreams, you stand no chance before life. Life, crashes all of them. And then I was talking to my wife and I said, I was just in the cafeteria after 10 years. Man, it's a disgusting place. It wasn't like this when I first got here, but, gradually, like America, it just kind of just begins to disappear. And then you get to a place where you say, you know what, forget daycare, I need to send my kids to school. Then you compare and contrast the public versus private. For all these years, you've talked so highly about inclusion and diversity and acceptance, but your emotional attachment to your kid, his or her innocence, protect them from all the ills that you see around you. You say, man, I may love people, but just not those kind of people. And I love education, but not the one that takes place over there. And so you begin to focus on private. And then you realize that, well, private schools are really, really good. It's just a little costly. Then you begin to reevaluate your entire life. And the point I guess I was trying to say is that, ideas in a vacuum sound really, really good. Liking people sounds really good. Being a bit more decent, a bit more humane sounds really, really good. But at the end of the day, they're just hollow words. And I don't mean to be somewhat dark and gloomy and depressing about all this stuff, but, it's kind of just the reality of life. Yeah.
I wanted to tell him, you remember back in the 80s and the 90s, when people want to close off into their phones and stuff like that. I think it's the world that's changing, so that's too.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying it's a good thing. To be staring at the phone and not knowing how to communicate. Like you said, you should speak to people like that. Imagine what kind of day looks like all day when I walk around over there. You know what I mean? So I know what you mean by that. And I'm looking for somebody just to speak. I'm not going to say nothing bad or something like that, but it do mean a lot when you acknowledge people.
Absolutely. Good. Yeah. Leah.
How do social norms change over time, and how exactly did apathy and autopilot become the norm? On Friday, I went to work. I worked in San Francisco. When I got off work, I got to the BART station, and the train that I normally take to get home, it wasn't running. And it wasn't that serious. It's another train that I can take, and then it's just one transfer. But I remember I was really irritated. And I later found out that the reason why the train wasn't running was because, not even a few hours ago, someone had jumped in front of a train at a station that the train that I take goes through. And my first thought was, being completely honest, my first thought was not, oh my gosh, someone died. My first thought was, well, man, why did they have to kill themselves in a public place? Now I can't get on the one-stop train to get home.
Yeah.
And I was talking with Cassie about it in the office. She brought up a book where Ospinski talked about being an autopilot and about how he was trying to get more into the habit of being aware and reflecting. And he got on a train and he fell asleep, not physically, but he just fell asleep. And when he got off at a station, he woke up. And I guess the experience kind of felt like that. And so I wanted to know, when exactly did apathy and autopilot become the norm? And how exactly did you get out of that habit? Because honestly, like, my apathy in that situation surprised even myself.
In Iran, we happen to be the second in the line for the biggest oil reserves, And yet, if you want to fill your car with gas, you really have to stand in line for about 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. And part of it is technology. The other part has to do with the Western influence and powers. And what you find very interesting is that you stand in line for 3 hours. Nobody complains. I mean, once in a while, someone gets irritated and annoyed, but for the most part, everybody just accepts, because that's just the way things have been for many, many, many hundreds of years. A couple of things about the creation of emotions. And since you've taken my class before, but many of you haven't, I'll, for the sake of boring you. Some years ago, Stanford did this research on the human psyche just to kind of figure out why human beings behave the way they do and whether or not we can coerce and manufacture emotions and desires inside them. So during the halftime of football, I'm not quite sure which football this was, football like Super Bowl 17 or 27 or 927. So for maybe just a second, not even a second, the logo of Pepsi-Cola came on the huge, this jumbotron, And, halftime is about 20, 30 minutes. And the sale of Pepsi-Cola or Coca-Cola went up by, I think, 6,000%. And I'm sure that most of the people sitting, in their houses, all of a sudden seeing this, and all of a sudden having this desire, I want to have some soda. They get in the car, and it's all under the guise of free will, my decision, my choice, my money, my this, my that, no one has power over me. And so they drive themselves to Safeway or 7-Eleven, and, they come home and ABCD. And one of the things that makes this particular experiment interesting is that the culture creates emotions, and the culture robs you of certain emotions. It's kind of like what Henry David Thoreau, the transcendentalist, said some years ago, which is, whenever you get something new in your life, Leah, you're going to lose a good amount of things. If you decide to go to school, for example, that's a new thing for you. But the cost is less time for TV, less time for friendships, less time to have leisure, party, and all that stuff. One new thing can rob you of 25 different things. And it is a gradual process. Now, just to be a little bit more honest about this, one of the things that you have to kind of consider is human beings have been around for thousands and millions of years. Empathy does not help us. There is no thing called animal activism. You're around here, you're naked. Life is tough, life is brutal. The only thing you can do is just hunt some animal down, kill him, skin the animal and just eat his flesh. And we also used to be cannibalists. And we still are to some extent when, awful things happen in life. And the idea of empathy and compassion and feeling intensely about the pain that another goes through, it's not helpful. Right now, you're young. When you become a parent, Tasha and Jesse here, and Myrna, sometimes without really knowing and without really being aware, you will spank your kid. But empathy now has a different shade to it, a different face to it. Reprimand, pain, punishment is another face of compassion and empathy. That you care for your kid's future so much that it's not a bad thing to inject them with a dose of pain. And hopefully that pain will last for a few days and will serve as a reminder. So in our history, we have had to exercise a good amount of violence and rage and anger, i.e., lack of empathy and compassion for another. Okay. Then we become domesticated. One of the things that we do is, as you know, we are hunter and gatherers for the longest time in our human history. Then you say, you know, waking up every morning, running around a cow or a dog or a sheep or a cat, you know, pinning them down and killing them and eating, that's just too much work on a daily basis. Let's see if we can do things differently. You know, so you kind of figure out the seasons. And then you come to realize, well, if you plant certain seeds, well, things grow and then you can mash them and eat them. You know. Or if you're able to kind of get close to certain animals and have them get used to you, instead of killing them, just gather like 20 sheep, 20 cows, you know, and the rest of them around and put a fence around it. And all of a sudden you realize, well, 50,000 years ago, agriculture came about, and then domestication came about. And one of the things that begin to happen is when you create, when you live in this environment, if I see you on a daily basis, you know, you come to my class on Monday and Wednesday, sometimes your schedule allows to visit my class in the morning on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The more I see you, there is something about us. The more you interact with anything, whether it's a cat or a dog or a pen, whatever it may be, you have no choice but to grow attached to it. That's the way we function. And that wasn't the case for us for many, many thousands of years. There is also another aspect to us, which is when there is poverty. In other words, when your father dies, when your mother dies, when your pet dies, when something bad happens to you, you need another human being in your life. You know, Bobby Fischer, for those of you in this class who like chess and who play chess once in a while, it's a beautiful game, really. He was sort of a weirdo, Bobby Fischer. He was asocial. He was a little paranoid for, I think, all the right reasons. Some paranoia are negative, some are quite positive because they're rooted in like your experiences. Near the end of his life, and he never married, he never had kids, he stayed away from people as much as possible. But near the end of his life, he said, there is nothing more magical than the human touch. That there is something about us in times of desperation, in times of crisis, you just need someone. You need someone to listen to your, you know, repressed emotions. You need someone to touch you. You need someone to listen to you. And to some extent, that's the function of gossip. I mean, some of you in this class may be of the Buddhist tradition, where it says, well, you should not lie or you should not gossip. I think, you know, if you're a Buddhist, if you're on the spiritual quest, then yes, you should kind of be careful of what you say, how you say it, what you think about, be mindful of this and that. But as a regular commoner, one of the ways we survive is through gossip. Well, you think I chose this particular profession because I have something to teach? No, I have a lot of emotions, and most often they're very, very intense. I come to class, I empty myself like a fuel tank, then I go home. And then my wife looks at me and says, so, how was your day? Fine, don't talk to me for the rest of the day, I have nothing to say. That's because I empty my fuel tank in the classroom. And the point I'm trying to make is, there comes a point in our human evolution where, you know, you realize that for all these years, you know, your only language was grunts and groans. Alphabets are created, you put the letters together, you create words and you create sentences. Then all of a sudden what you realize is you can actually put your emotions and your thoughts and your everyday experience into language and share them with another. Right? Then something really interesting happened. The barter system went away because of the Industrial Revolution and all the privileges that came with it. You know, Leah, you have a fridge in your house, which means that you no longer really have to go to Safeway. You don't have to look at people. You don't have to ask questions about some of the people who work there. Is this a good brand or is this a better brand? You don't have to look at the teller. You don't have to say, hello, how are you? She doesn't have to tell you, well, this is going to cost you like $5. And you're going to say, well, you know, I only have $4.50 and 50 cents short. And the teller will say, it's okay, it's on me. You know, you have a fridge now. You just go home. You have your own room. One of the things about third world countries where I'm from, no central air or heat. We had 3 rooms, okay? But all of us simply gathered in the main hall. It was the only heater around. We had no rooms, private rooms. There were no private bathrooms. We all had to share. We had to sit on the floor and eat our food. And one of the things that happens in poverty is that you have no choice but to share. You have needs. And one of the things about hierarchy, living in society, kind of like this. If you have a question, raise your hand. Okay? So who sets the rules in the house? Your parents. Do you disrespect them? No, the culture won't allow it. You're domesticated. Your emotions are domesticated. In New Guinea, for example, you may be a 70-year-old man. You have no right to express your negative emotions. If you're angry at the age of 70, a 12-year-old will have the right to look at you and say, Grandpa, sit in the corner. You're privatizing your emotion. That's not the way we function. Okay. And the truth, Leah, is, you're very, very self-sufficient now. We don't need other people. You also, as Amir would say, you also have your cell phone. If you want to be entertained, you don't need to have a conversation with another human being. Just YouTube a few things. They'll entertain you for a number of years. And just in case you become extremely bored, we have all these wonderful action movies. We don't need the narrative in the movies anymore. The moment you walk into the theater, the moment the movie turns on, your dopamine level goes way up. You're engaged. And, when you have so little contact with other human beings, the strangest thing is that, I've been teaching for about 30 some odd years. People walk in the first day as strangers and they leave as strangers. No one says hello. No one greets anyone, and if they do, it's in passing. Here's the other thing. I've had students over my house for the past 20 years. And these are mainly Westerners. They find the culture a little exotic, somewhat evolved a little, and they say, I want to learn the language, and I want this, and I want that. And here's the thing. It is really, really difficult to rewire yourself. If all of a sudden you catch yourself having lost the ability to be empathetical, the truth is it's going to take you a long, 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 long time to kind of cut that umbilical cord and rewire yourself to another. So the other thing you need to kind of know about emotions is that emotions have history. You can come to this class and look at me and say, I just have a bad feeling about this class. It's a feeling, it can come and go. If on the other hand, you had to tolerate me for an entire semester, and then you go to the counselor's office and they say to you, well, you have to take an ethics class, Humanities 30, to graduate, you're going to look at the schedule. The moment you see my name, you say, nah, I'd rather delay my graduation by a semester. I don't want to be around this guy. And the reason why this is no longer a feeling but an emotion is because you've had a history with me for about 16 weeks and it's been dark and negative. So empathy is historical. It's a very, very strong and intense emotions. There is another thing that you need to understand about this emotion or concept called empathy. 10 years ago, you would see one homeless person in your community. One, maybe two. It was like a rare thing. It was an exotic thing. And it would be, you feel bad about seeing someone homeless, and you would actually reach out and help them. But now you see them everywhere. And you don't know who is legit. You don't know who is faking it. And what you realize is the culture has created a scenario where you have no choice but to doubt yourself and doubt what you see. And then you have like 60 minutes doing an experiment, which is like they go around in New York and they talk to a few homeless people and they realize that these panhandlers, they make about 70, 80,000 bucks a year. They go to Reno, gamble it away. You say, wait, could that be so? The person that you see standing by the light holding a sign, Is that a faker? And then you actually want to help, but then you say, wait a minute, I don't trust the culture. I don't trust myself. I don't trust this person. Okay. The other aspect of this thing called empathy is the following. I mean, look, your life is busy. If the new studies are right, that 6 out of 10 Americans suffer from chronic depression. You know what depression is? It means that you are the sun and you are the earth. You revolve around yourself all the time. The only person you care for is you and your troubles and your problems. And if you are the only person you care for, well, you don't really have the proper brain space to care for anyone else. So next time you feel guilty about not being compassionate enough, you should take a few steps back and not be so quick to judge yourself. The truth is, it has taken the American culture, I don't know about Europe, but it has taken this particular culture. Maybe it's just California. Maybe Texas is different. I don't know. Maybe Louisiana is different. But California, it has taken America about 150 years. 150 years. I'm not even including racism in that. For another human being to give themselves the right and the power to lynch another human being. And that has to do with social Darwinism. We'll talk about that perhaps at a different date. And so in some ways, I think you should be very, very, very happy. It's something my brother and I talk about all the time. I call my dad and my mom every day, and I speak to them for about an hour. They're both very healthy. My father is right now, he's becoming a bit more forgetful as the days go by. And so my brother and I say, man, if dad continues to survive another 5-6 years, Amir, you have to come to Roseville every week, maybe twice a week. My brother lives in Roseville, so, and then my sister. And all of a sudden you realize one of the problems of compassion, empathy, or a culture that pushes you into being communal is that it makes you responsible for other human beings. The fact that I have to call my parents every day on days even I don't really feel like talking, it's like a weight I have to carry. Now, imagine someone in this class, for whatever the reasons are, they just have no connection with their parents. They can spend their time however way they want. The idea of being forced to talk to a father you don't like or a mother you hate, the culture doesn't make you responsible. You are emancipated, you are free, you are liberated. So the point, I suppose, is there are cons, there are pros. But here's this last thing I will say, and then we'll move on. To exercise kindness towards anyone requires energy. Lots of energy. And for those of us who have kids, we know that. You forgive, and the kids continue to crap all over you. I mean, that's what kids do. That's just the way life works. Okay. And there comes a point of irritation, annoyance, frustration. Your intellect comes down to say, you just read Marcus Aurelius, be stoic. You just read the New Testament, turn the other cheek. You just read the prodigals from the Gospel of Luke. Kids are stupid. It's been said to you for the past 5,000 years. Forgive your kid. But that stands before a very limited amount of human capacity. And you have 2 kids. You realize kid number 1 frustrates the hell out of you and doesn't do anything for you. Kid number 2 frustrates you, but not that much, and actually listens. and you realize something really interesting. With the passage of time, you pay less attention to kid number one, who is not at the proper stage to listen and to hear, but you pay more attention to kid number two. And you realize your empathy, your compassion, your kindness, your generosity has a good amount of educated biases in it. Next time you want to help someone, okay? Look, first of all, when it comes to suicide, for example, someone jumping in front of a train to end their life, you're only looking at the final stage of someone's life. What you need to look at is the following. You're born with a great amount of hopes and dreams. A lot of things happen in life. No one desires to end their life. That's not the way we function as human beings. Unless you happen to be a Malcolm X or a soldier in a battlefield where you're willing to, give up your life for your brothers. Okay? Now, where was I?
He's talking about giving up soldiers.
Yeah. And yeah. So, whenever you have trouble in life, you try to fix it. And you try, you fail, you try, you fail. You still have a good amount of hope. There comes a point where you say, you know what, I've done everything. And by the time you get to that particular stage, you've given up on your friends, on your parents, on books, on YouTube, on therapists, on medication. I mean, it's just a dead-end road. And, for someone to rescue you, they have to put their entire life on pause and enter into your world and sit and listen and little by little try to pull you out. And I don't know if this day and age where people have so much on their plate, they might have the desire, but practically speaking, in a very pragmatic way, it's nearly impossible. So by the time as someone jumps from a bridge, hangs themselves or whatever, So exercise your power of empathy by discerning. And there is one more thing I should say. If I keep adding to this stuff. And that has to do with first world people. And since, we're here, let's just talk plainly Americans. Americans are not very gracious people. They're not thankful people. So even if you do a whole host of things for them, saying thank you and being appreciative, that's not the culture from which they came. So the idea that no good work goes unpunished is something you should pay attention to. Do you have a follow-up?
So you mentioned a bit about Darwinism. So I wanted to know about survival of the fittest and eugenics and empathy. There was an anthropologist who said that the first sign of human civilization was a healed femur, because in ancient times, a broken femur meant death. And if a person lived long enough that their femur healed, that meant that someone stayed. And there were other people who were saying that our interpretations of survival of the fittest was wrong, and that humans actually survived because we had empathy for one another and we helped one another. And there is also the issue of eugenics with CRISPR and DNA editing technology. I think it was maybe 2013, where people wanted to wipe out mosquitoes completely. And there were lots of debates over that. Recently, they used genetic gene editing to remove a gene from a baby that would cause a life-threatening illness. And there was also a debate over that, with people saying that it's going to be editing the human genome, and that's a slippery slope, and it can easily fall into eugenics. And I suppose there is a lot of debate over that. And I mean, is there a correct stance to have?
Well, Charles Darwin is, 18th, 19th century fellow. Science is still quite primitive. And his idea, for the most part, really before social Darwinism came about, was, you look at a bear in California and you compare that bear to one that lives in Alaska, and they look the same, they talk the same, they eat the same. And he was curious as to why the ones that you find in California are brown and not that fairy, but the ones that you find in Alaska, they are a different color. And they're not really, it's not hair, it's translucent. You can actually see through them. But it just appears as if they have a big, fur on them. And he saw this with birds, he saw this with fish, he saw this with all hosts of things. And he came to the conclusion that it's not really an act of God. I mean, God really is not in play of saying, in Alaska I'm going to make this, in California I'm going to make that. I was born in Iran. We don't suffer from skin cancer. For whatever the reasons are, despite the heat, despite the sun, despite being in the sun for like 20 hours a day, no skin cancer. Maybe things are different now because of food and other factors that people have to consume. And you realize the survival of the fittest simply means the following. If you put a California bear in Alaska, it's not fit enough to survive. What it can do, however, is the following. A female California bear will mate with a male Alaskan bear. Their kid will be a little brown, little white. And if the California bear lives for about 5 years, the offsprings will live about 10 years. Then those offsprings will mate with some more Alaskan bears. And all of a sudden you realize, well, something about our organism, something about us is intelligent enough to modify itself in order to survive the environment. I'm not really quite sure what Darwin would say about what's happening with technology these days, Nietzsche had said something really interesting for those of you who like these ideas. In the 19th century, and that's remarkable for someone to have such an insight, he had argued that survival of the fittest in the West means you come home, you sit on your sofa, you grab your Subway sandwich and a bag of chips, and you watch TV for the next 10 hours. That's how people survive. Just in case your companion comes home and wants to go out and exercise or trim the lawn or trim the trees, the spouse will say, "What are you doing? Come sit next to me." And just in case you say no, you'll be sleeping on the sofa. And eventually she or he will leave you. And what Nietzsche had argued is that we have entered a particular stage in our evolution where the most fit are the most lazy, the most incompetent, the most stupid. 400 million people. Look at what MAGA has done. MAGA. The amount of fear it has injected into society. And the truth is, if you're not fit for that fear, if you're not fit for that brutality, you will stay in your home. And I mean, I come to school at 4 in the morning and I listen to NPR on the way here. You know, some families in Minneapolis and other places in this country, the parents and the kids have locked themselves in their homes for like a month and a half. They refuse to come out. You know, they are not fit to survive. They don't have the tools. You don't know how to combat the ICE agents. You don't know what to do with the government. It's just too much. And eventually what you'll have in this country is just white Americans. You know, the point I'm trying to make is ultimately, if you want to understand what the survival of the fittest really means, look at the culture and look at what the culture defines as fit. I mean, look at what Kim Kardashian and Beyonce have done to our culture. Look at the music industry. If you want to make some money, if you want to be labeled as an artist, you kind of have to merge with those people and their kind of music. Anything that's a little offshoot, it's going to be rejected. You won't survive. You'll probably go bankrupt. I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the 1980s, you had all these, you know, punk groups, but they were underground because their music for the culture was just undigestible. I mean, grabbing a microphone and screaming into it, who the hell would want to listen to that? You know, and yet they realized that these folks, these underground, you know, punk rockers, when they would have a concert, lines of these young kids, you know, would stand for hours to get a ticket to go in. The genius of capitalism, if we can somehow market this for the millionaires. I mean, look at rap. Initially, it was social message about justice, about fairness, about eradication of racism. Look at it now. I mean, it's just shit. I mean, it really is. It's garbage. You know. I mean, there is this guy, what's the name of, was it NF? I don't know, I don't even know what that means, NF. I mean, he's got some really, really wonderful things to say. And his rap, and it's like 1 in a million artist who says, you know what? My dad was a messed up person. My mom was a messed up person. I was in therapy for a number of years. I did drugs and alcohol. I've recovered a little. I'm going to write music about real life. And you listen to the lyrics, and it's beautiful. You know, and all of a sudden you realize you just need a couple of mavericks. But, you know, you have to have a lot of people who are interested in embracing trauma and being able to live with that trauma, to bring it to the surface, to say, you know what, I like this kind of music. And all of a sudden you realize the culture now goes through the shift. We're no longer going to listen to Snoop Dogg. We're going to maybe listen to Tupac a bit more. His message is a bit different, even though he was a little contaminated later on. You know. So ultimately, the culture sells you things, and the culture eventually, whatever it has put a price tag on, will put the number 0. It no longer has any value. And once you realize it's been a waste, the culture then sells you another thing. And you know, that's what the culture does. It sells you emotions, sells you feelings, sells you guilt, all sorts of things. Survival of the fittest. Tasha, yes.
Said that you come to class and you offset your emotions and let your emotions out.
Yeah.
Are there any that you're contending with right now?
That was just a joke. I have no feelings. You know, when I was getting married, my wife looks at me and says, I love you. And I didn't know what to say. And every morning, you know, I talk to my kids. Love you, Dad. Keep it up, buddy. Good job. I get here about 4. I write for about 5 hours. By the time, you know, I'm done, I have nothing left inside me. I don't much care about teaching. I don't much care about talking. I don't much care about the questions that people ask. I just try to avoid eye contact with students I don't like.
That's a follow-up question.
And I don't like him because maybe they're not paying attention, maybe they're playing with their cell phone, maybe they just smell, maybe they just look indifferent or miserable. And so, instead of like looking at them and feeling miserable myself, I said, fuck that. I'm just going to look that way. Yeah. I mean, you're a married woman. So sometimes your husband comes home and you just look the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marcus Aurelius.
Yes.
He was a Stoic, right?
Okay.
He ruled the whole empire. He still remained good.
We don't know that. Have you heard of this man, Martin Luther King Jr.? Are you sure? Was he a good man?
Depends
On what?
on what you're evaluating.
I'm asking you if he was a good man. Was he a good man to his wife? And here's the thing. There are two components in us. One component serves God, serves creativity, serves authenticity, serves truth, serves, the thing that make you passionate. You're filled with empathy and generosity. That's a part of you. There is another part of you that engages in rage, in violence. You're a Scrooge. You have envy and jealousy and lust and all those things. When it comes to someone like Martin Luther King Jr., what you have is he's like 75% saint, 25% human. And when the 25% human part comes to the surface, he does what all of us in this class do. He has sex, he pees, he puts his finger in all of his noses, he does all sorts of crazy things, right? But we're going to dismiss all of that because that's not what we're concerned with. We're concerned with the 75 parts of him. All of us in this class have had parents who once in a while yell at us and reprimand us. But they do that maybe 25% of the time. 75% of the time, they're actually quite decent. When, the scale is flipped, where they are mean 75% and kind 25%, then you leave that environment with a good amount of trauma on the inside, okay? When you talk about Marcus Aurelius, first of all, you're talking about almost 2,000 years ago, number one. Second, you're talking about a guy, as you said, who has an empire, and that empire happens to be the entirety of this world. Okay, how do you get this world? Well, you kill a lot of people, you dominate them, you kill our husbands, our wives, our kids, right? Aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters. Okay, and somehow you have to go home feeling okay about all the people you have murdered. Not perhaps you, but through you, you've allowed these people to be butchered. And then you go home. Now, here's the thing about Marcus Aurelius that you need to appreciate. I'm not really quite sure at what age he started writing in his journal. Maybe it was near the end of his life. Maybe he was writing it the moment he was born. Okay. If he was keeping a journal in his 20s, and he lived to be 70, for example, what you have is a man butchering people, going home, having a good amount of repentance at the age of 20. That's unheard of. Saying, Marcus, why do you have to be so greedy? When you die, the only thing you need is 3x6. That's the only piece of property you need to have. کوزه چشم حریصان پر نشد تا صدف قانع نشد پردر نشد. That contentment is not wanting a lot, but wanting little. The less desires you have inside you, the richer that you are. Okay. Now, Marcus Aurelius, again, if he was keeping his journal at a young age, it means that he goes butchers people, comes home with a good amount of guilt, and writes it down. Now, here's the trick to Marcus Aurelius. I am sure you have read this passage in the New Testament. And again, do not look at this book as a religious text, but as any other book out there that has the power to give you a few insights about life. Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give to God what belongs to God. Let's unpack that for a moment. Am I Caesar in this class? Absolutely. Do I care for you guys? No. Do I care for your future? No. You need to know that. I am not your friend. I'm not going to be your friend. Never in a million years. You can bring me bags of coffee. I'm still not going to be your friend. And if you mistake this back and forth that you and I have, Tasha, as friendship, and you decide not to do any coursework and come to class and be lazy and do other things, if you don't even have that aspect of shame about you, where you know I am here looking at you, seeing that you're doing other things, but you still don't care, I will fail you. So your presence in this classroom, you need to look at me as Caesar. This is the world of politics. Now, you go home. You know you have to do a question for tonight. Now comes your promise to your authenticity, creativity, the kingdom of God within. How do you want to present yourself on paper? Is it going to be an extension of politics? Or is it going to be politics and creativity? Are you going to find yourself once more in the place of Caesar or the place of God? In other words, Tasha found something interesting and she wants to unpack that interest, expressed on paper, and then you submit. And then I read and say, wow, this is really, really fascinating. And then you get a good score. If that's the case for Marcus Aurelius, what you're dealing with is an exceptional human being who can serve both Caesar and God, knows politics, but also knows that his decency, his humanity remains intact despite having butchered a lot of people. One of the best books that perhaps you'll encounter, and it's a book that I mentioned to my class last semester, Gang Leader for a Day, I think. It's by an Indian guy who was doing his dissertation for his PhD in sociology at University of Chicago. He goes to his chair and he says, listen, I want to write something on the projects, but I don't want to just read books and then write a long essay. I actually want to go into the projects. And his advisor, being a white guy, looks at him and says, and the candidate is this Indian kid. He says, listen, you're not black. You're not going to be welcomed. They'll hurt you. You don't want to do this. My advice to you, as your advisor, read a couple of books, do some research, write your essay, get your doctorate and go away. He says, no, I actually want to go there and see what's going on. It takes him a few months to be accepted. It takes him a few more months to be received by the leader of this organization. And he comes to realize something really interesting. The alpha male of this community sends out his runners every morning to Montclair, somewhere, rich white neighborhood. And the runners sell the public some drugs. The runners bring back the money and give it to the leader. The leader, this guy, goes to Costco, buys diapers, medicine, food for all the 700 people who live in his cult. And what you realize is something interesting. You have a man who understands the world of politics. He understands white community and what drugs they favor. He understands the power of money. He understands addiction. He also understands runners. What kind of runners do you need? Because you need to be savvy just in case you get caught. You must also understand that money gives you power, but you can't allow that power to contaminate you because you have people depending on you. Okay, from the outside, it looks very unethical. You're selling drugs to this community. Why? Why not just go work for Home Depot? Make your livelihood in a decent, normal, typical way that most of us do. But no, he understands that politics is a crude game. Nobody cares. I mean, look at, for example, this Republican position about abortion. Abortion is bad. Well, that may be so. But should I not abort? Will you help me with health care? Will you help me with diapers? And the answer is no. Life is sacred as long as it lives inside your tummy. The moment it comes out, I don't really care. It's your life. You shouldn't have sex, despite the fact that the government promotes pornography. I mean, you need to understand that when we speak about ethics and moral norms in capitalism, the whole thing is just ridiculous and funny. It makes no sense. Now, going back to Marcus Aurelius, I have a feeling that Marcus Aurelius, and it happens to all of us as you get a little older, at least most of us, Hugh Hefner is exempt from this. You get a little older, you're forced to look yourself in the mirror a bit more reflectively, and you say, shit, I'm no longer 20, 30, 40, 50, my back hurts a little, my knees hurt a little, I'm walking slower, the pee comes out much slower now, it takes a longer time, I have difficulty sleeping, aches and pains are my best companions. And then he sits back and he says, okay, you know what, maybe it's time for me to actually write down my reflections. Not for publication, but I will have my reflections serve as a mirror so I can see myself in them. Why am I doing this? What's it for? And you have a journal because you're a conflicted human being. You're addicted to butchering people. You're addicted to dominating people. But you also have the desire to stop it. You can't stop it practically, but you do so when you go to your tent. Now, if you want to know what Stoicism is all about, if that is the next part of your question, I'll create a scenario for you. I hope it never happens to you in a million years, but it's a classroom, so we'll make a scenario, we'll see where it goes. You're a mother. You miss your cycle, you take a test, you're pregnant. Little by little, you grow to be attached to the thing growing inside you. You feel its movement. You have this love for this unborn, and then it's born, or it comes out, and then you hold, and then love just explodes. You care. Then they get to be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have less power over them. And as time passes, your power diminishes even more. And as you realize that you have less power to control your kid, your attachment also grows less. Your attachment grows so little to this kid that they come home at 2 and you won't care. They smell like weed and you won't care. They say, Mom, I think I'm going to pack up and leave. Move out. You don't care. And you realize something really, really interesting. As your child disappoints you more and more and more and more, your attachment to your child lessens. Now, it doesn't mean you won't love him, but it means that they will impact you less. Now, God forbid you come to a point where you say, I am no longer his mom. I don't care what happens to me. He may have come out of me, but he's not really part of me. He doesn't have my culture. He doesn't have my philosophy of life, nothing. I don't care. And so he becomes an outcast. And you realize that you have found yourself liberated, freed from worries because you no longer care. And because you no longer care, you no longer feel. And because you no longer feel, he can't have any power over you. He calls you from prison. Mom, I'm locked up. Fuck you, I told you so. And that's the crux of Stoicism. Emotions come and go. Don't bank on any emotion. Today you hate, 10 minutes later you love. Just make sure when the hate comes, don't burn bridges, and just make sure that when there is love, don't put all of your eggs in one basket, because emotions can turn at any time. If you want to free yourself from emotions, let's do it this way. Imagine you're single. Imagine I'm single. You want a companion, no? Of course you do. You're tired of hanging out with dogs and cats and rats, right? I want a companion too. But the question now is, Tasha, how do you want to move into this relationship? And that depends on the needs that you have. The more needs you have, the more dependence you have on me, and the more I control you. Which means that at any moment, I can turn the table. You're happy, I can make you sad. You're sad, I can make you happy. I can buy and sell emotions to you. If on the other hand, you walk into this relationship with education, with money, with self-sufficiency, you realize that your need for me is maybe 2 hours a day. You won't give a shit about me for about 22 hours. Now that is a great freedom to have in a relationship, which means I don't really have very much power to hurt you, except for those 2 hours that we're together. The less you care for life, the less life has power over you. If you take this class because you want to graduate, because you have to graduate, I have power over you. Every great score that you get in this class will either make you happy or sad. If on the other hand, you're sitting in this room just for fun, get away from the husband, get away from your kids, getting away from the house for just a couple of hours, you're going to come, you're going to sit, you're going to laugh, you're going to, say a joke here and there. And I'm going to go home, I'm going to look at Canvas, start grading the scores, grading the essays, only to realize, oh, Tasha hasn't submitted anything. You know why you don't submit? You don't give a shit. You're here for leisure. Yeah, Phil.
If you care less about your partner, wouldn't that mean that you don't love them?
You can't love your companion. You will never love your companion.
Why is that?
Because that's not the way love works.
How does love
First of all, a couple of things, forgive me. The concept of love, this romanticized concept of love, was demonized, was not looked upon very fondly for many thousands of years. Life was tough. I marry you not because I love you. I marry you because you have 5 cows. I marry you because you have a Tesla. I marry you because you have some money. Okay? I marry you because you have a good family. Okay? As time moves, as life becomes a bit more complicated because of technology, as you become a bit more self-sufficient, you realize, wrongly of course, that you don't really care if your companion came from under a rock, if they have parents or no parents, if they've smoked, if they've drank. You don't care about any of that stuff. All you know is that you love him. Another factor. In industrious societies, human beings are moved into loneliness. When you're lonely, that's a great poverty to suffer from. When you're lonely, you're not very visible, you're not very relevant, you're not very significant. When you fall in love, then you become visible. Then you become significant. Okay? Life has never been romanticized for us. You don't go out there to find yourself a soulmate. That's stupid. You don't go to school to become a pianist. That's even more stupid. You don't get a job to buy yourself a car. You get yourself a job to give your paycheck to your father. You buy a house to shelter your community. You get married to give more power to your tribe. You get married because the culture tells you, Fuke, you want to have kids in your 20s, not 90s. Okay? The other thing, people of all these cultures know that life sucks, life is difficult. You don't want to add more to your difficulty by going out with someone who's fucked up in the head. But when you're like in a romantic stage, you don't care about those things. They have might as well just murdered like 25 people. So, oh, I love him. I don't really care about those things. So, again, for the longest time in our human history, you don't marry for love. It just doesn't exist. One of the best examples, watch that movie. There you go. It's called Fiddler on the Roof. Yeah, it's a musical. It's maybe not musical, I don't really know. But what you have is this young woman goes to the father and says, I'm in love. The father says, what the hell are you talking about? I promised you this old guy. Dad, I'm in love. Well, what is that? You know, like when you're in love with someone and the father has no idea what the girl is talking about. So it's a brand new concept for him. So he goes home, goes to his wife and says, woman, do you love me? I wash your laundry, I cook for you, I clean for you. I guess I love you. I said, no, I'm not talking about cooking and clean. Do you love me? And the wife says, what the hell are you talking about? And what you realize is that you may say you love someone, but the truth is 99.9999% of the time you have no idea what the hell you're talking about. And 99.999999% of the time you're in love with the wrong thing and the wrong person. Okay? I know we're out of time, but just FYI. If you want to love, love for the right reasons. And let me tell you what that is. Do you want someone to shit all over you on a daily basis? So don't go out with a crackhead. Now, you can fall in love with a crackhead, but if you're able to look at your date objectively with eyes that are clear and a mind that's sober and rational, you say, wait a minute. You know, this person came from this background. There's a good chance this background creates lots of like negative habits. And this is just a phase. Eventually, you know, this romantic stage will pass and the dark stuff will show themselves. And I got too many stuff on my plate as well. So do I want to like add another stuff? And if you're intelligent, you'll walk away. In other words, you will walk on your emotions because you enjoy freedom more than 10 minutes of romanticizing life. But we'll talk about love perhaps on next week. Because the Greeks, man, 7 different ways of falling in love. And you got to go step by step. Yeah. What time is it? We have 2 minutes. This is America. We can do a quickie. Atheists? You know, I was a hospice volunteer for about 7 years. And I worked at the hospital Child Life Services. This is where kids, they haven't even reached the age of 15. You know, they have like cancer or whatever. And, you know, their life is very, very short. And so you kind of sit with all these people. And what they all have in common, whether you're a child. I mean, children can accept this stuff much better than older folks. That's another injustice of life, that here you're a 60-year-old man, you know. You would have hoped that after living for 60 years, you would kind of walk towards your death in a more peaceful way. But no, I mean, you've lived such a shitty life. It's been so distracting that all of a sudden, you know, you realize that death is right there and your dreams are going to be crushed and buried with you. You don't really know what to do at this stage. Kids are very, very different. There are these moments, and it depends on the sort of death that you're having. And again, these are, again, heavy topics. There are 3-4 different kinds of deaths. there is one type of death that's called a tragic death, and that's really just reserved for children who are far too young. They haven't lived life to the fullest, whatever that may mean, and all of a sudden life comes in and wants to snatch everything away from them. And the kid says, man, I was just waiting for my mom to get PS5 for me, go to Disneyland for me. Why is that desire being, stripped from me? So that's a tragic life where you're far too young and you don't really deserve this, but that's just the way life is. Then there is good death. And good death is, yesterday I was really, really tired. I slept about 1 a.m, woke up at 3, got to campus by 4 and started writing. At a certain point, I just put my head on the desk and I just passed out for the next 25 minutes. And I woke up and the first thing that came to mind is, man, if I had died, it would have been such a peaceful death. And that's called a good death. You have lived a relatively good life, not without problems, but it's been relatively okay. You put your head down and you just don't wake up. Okay. And then there is like bad death. One of the things that oftentimes you hear with cancer patients and with people who are really, really depressed and on the verge of suicide is that the pain, I can't tolerate the pain anymore. It's too much. I wake up with pain. I stay awake with pain and I go to sleep with pain. And I can't tolerate it. And you're not at that stage where the next day you just die. You have to suffer through this pain for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So it also depends on your intellectual maturity. One of the best philosophers, David Hume, he was an atheist around the 17th century. He had one of the best deaths that any philosopher could have. Very peaceful. Didn't believe in a soul, didn't believe in a God, didn't believe in a thing that judges you after you die. Nothing. So a good amount of it really depends on... Let me just end class with this. If there is anything you need to remember about Socrates and philosophy is the following. Philosophy is there only to teach you one thing: how to die well. Not logic, not ethics, none of those things. How to die well. But in order for you to die well, you gotta learn a few things about ethics and logic and epistemology and the rest of all that junk. See you next week, Monday. Take care. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You too, man.